Pretty much everyone in the Fiery Cross is horny. Hello friends and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to share the books that I read in September. And that means that it's October, which totally freaks me out. And the best way to describe how I feel is I saw this on Instagram. It said January, February, the coronavirus, December. So yeah, that's pretty much how I feel. In September, I read a total of 7 books, from historical fiction to a mystery thriller and of course young adult fantasy. And in total, I read 3,376 pages. If you like these kind of videos, then don't forget to click that subscribe button and hit that bell so you never miss another video of me again. Let's get started. I'm just going to discuss the books in the order that I've read them. So first up is A Forest of Souls by Laura M. Lee. And if you've seen my previous wrap up, you will know that I started this in August and I finished it in September. I was actually really excited for this book because it is an Asian inspired young adult fantasy. The story starts off quite strong. We follow our main character called Shveta and her best friend Xiango, who are both 4th years in the Queen's Company, which is kind of a military school, and when they finish their school they get to go to the Royal Army or the Royal Navy. But then something really horrible happens, and this is not a spoiler because it is also in the description of the book. Xiango dies. Somehow Shveta restores Xiango to life and she finds out that she's a shaman. But in a kingdom ruled and predominantly populated by humans, being a shaman is kind of a problem. So this is around 60 pages in and there's nothing left for me to tell you because after the 60 pages it was just chaos. There's the Deadwood, there's a Spider King, there were too many weird motives, unnecessary dialogue, shadow hunters, and all of a sudden there was this political thing going on. There were just too many elements, and although all the elements were great, it just didn't work in one story. I wish that the author would have just stuck with Shveta being a shaman, developing her abilities, finding her place in this world that doesn't really accept her. That would have been amazing, and finding out more about her healing skills. Because the story just wasn't there for me, I also felt no connection to the characters, and honestly I was really close to DNFing this book, but I pushed through and I'm kind of glad I did. I ended up giving it 2 stars. My favorite quote: "Danger makes you deadly. See it misunderstood. It had never been danger, it was fear." Next up is The Red Scrolls of Magic by Cassandra Clare, and this is definitely an LGBTQ plus book because we follow the relationship between Magnus Bane and Alec Lightwood. And Alec is still kind of in the process of exploring his sexuality. He's learning about being bisexual, pansexual. There's also a female-female romance in the story. There's loads of romantic scenes and exploring sexuality. And of course all in a high fantasy world with loads of magical elements. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. And I found out that Magnus Bane is Indonesian. Who knew? This book takes place after the events of City of Glass. So if you've read the first 3 books of The Mortal Instruments, you can read this one. The story starts as a romantic getaway for Magnus and Alec in Paris, but soon it turns into a search for a demon worshipping cult called the Crimson Hands. Because this cult was apparently founded by Magnus Bane as a joke years ago, and they are somehow now responsible for finding out who the leader of this cult is and ending it. I just remembered something. It's not only written by Cassandra Clare, it's also written by Wesley Chu, but that's just really small next to Cassandra Clare, so I always forget to mention that. But the writing style is as you can expect from Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. It is action-packed, high-paced, loads of sarcasm and plot twists. Although the story was a bit over the top, especially towards the end, I did really enjoy it. It's really refreshing and entertaining, and I gave this one 4 stars. And I'm also really looking forward to read the second book in this series called The Lost Book of the White. The next book I wanted to talk about is Shielded by Kaylynn Flanders. This came in a FairyLoot box. As soon as I saw this book, I was instantly intrigued because I just love the cover. We can see a heroine with a sword. I don't know why I made that movement, but that's I don't know. And that's exactly what you get, because this is Cassandra, and she is a princess who has magical abilities and who knows her skill on the battlefield. Her kingdom, the kingdom of Halendi, is in trouble, and in exchange for resources, she is promised to the prince of the neighboring Turia. And on her way there, the royal caravan is ambushed and a bigger threat reveals itself. This book is a trope treasure chest because it has almost all the YA fantasy tropes. The main character is the chosen one, all adults are useless, her parents are dead, she's an outsider, the world around her is falling apart. Alright, and there's an unobtainable romance. So it doesn't really add anything new, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed it. And I think that's because the world building is just really diverse and there's loads of details. There's even a little bit of lore. There are different kingdoms, there's different clothing styles, different magical abilities. I really like the fighting scenes, how the author described those. And there's also a fair amount of questing, which I always appreciate in fantasy books. What I found interesting is that the book is written from the point of view of Cassandra, but every once in a while you get a look at the other side, so kind of the dark side, the evil guys, the way they think, what they are scheming. And I thought that was very interesting because then you know something that the main character does not. Apparently Shielded is part of a duology. We need more of those because I'm getting tired of all these trilogies. That's 3 books, people, that I have to add to my TBR. So duologies, give me more of them. And I'm definitely gonna read the second book because it is just a great YA fantasy read and definitely one I would recommend if you're into that genre. I gave it 4 stars. The next read is The Daughters of Foxcote Manor by Eve Chase. This came in a Once Upon a Book Club box, which is a really unique book box. So if you want to see one of those unboxings, I will leave it up in the info cards. And the story starts off with a newspaper clipping of 1971, and it says, "A body found in the woods." On the next page, we go back in time 3 weeks before the body was found, and we follow Rita, who is a nanny for the Harrington family. And this family consists of Jeannie, who is the mother, her 2 kids, Teddy and Hera, and Rita herself as the nanny. They pull up at Foxcote Manor, which is in the Forest of Dean, and the father has decided to stay behind in London. And the reason the Harringtons are in Foxcote Manor is because they have to recover from a horrible event that took place in their house in London. And in the present, we follow Sylvie, who's looking for answers regarding her family's history. And that's kind of all I can tell you guys because there are more POVs, but mentioning them would be spoiling it for you. So this author is really good at building up suspense. I think it is about half the book that has this purpose. You know that something is gonna happen, you just don't know exactly what. It's also really heavy on dialogues, interactions, and family dynamics. And I love that every character has different layers. So there's kind of this outer appearance that seems like they're doing fine, but then Jeannie, for instance, is coping with PTSD and depression. And then Rita, the nanny, who's also called Big Rita because he's very tall for a woman, is very insecure and always takes a backseat in life. And it's really fun to read about her developing into this strong woman. It's definitely a mystery book that can surprise you. It's a page turner. I love the ambience of Foxcote Manor, the character growth, and a book that you should pick up on a rainy day with a hot cocoa and maybe dim the lights a bit. 4 stars. September was also the month in which I finally read the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid Kemmerer. And this is kind of a hard book to talk about if you haven't read A Curse So Dark and Lonely, because that way I will be spoiling a huge part of what it is about. So if you haven't read A Curse So Dark and Lonely, I would probably skip this book review. There were multiple things that I loved about this book. So first of all, the symmetry. We start off with a chapter about Harper, then we get all these chapters about Gray and Leanda, and then it ends with a chapter of Ren. Our 2 main characters are Gray and Leanda, and Gray is of course the former guardsman of Ren and the heir with a stronger claim to the throne. And Leanda is the daughter of the Queen of Shallow, which is a neighboring kingdom. After reading this book, I really have a special place for Gray in my heart. That guy is so nice, and he just makes such good choices, and he is so loyal and just really fun to read about. And Leanda is also a great addition, mainly because she has a very aggressive mother and she doesn't always agree with her mother. She wants to be a gentle and kind ruler. And what I also really liked is that all the characters are young adult, but the book just feels really mature and raw. I mentioned the same thing about the first book. It just all feels very real, even though it all takes place in a fantasy realm. There's violence, there's romance, there's politics, loyalty conflicts. There are some very tense scenes and emotional moments. The ending, I mean, oh my gosh, that's a cliffhanger ending. That was the worst. Now I really need to read the third book in the series. And my favorite quote, the most dangerous person at the party is always the girl sitting alone with a book. So true. This book just transported me to Emberfall, and I just had the best experience reading it. I gave this 4.5 stars. If you've been following my wrap-ups, this comes as no surprise. I've also read The Fiery Cross by Gabaldon. So my goal is to end the entire Outlander series in 2020. I'm not entirely sure if I'm gonna make it, but we're gonna try. And because these books are so intimidating, I've decided to listen to them. And it's done by a wonderful narrator called Davina Porter. This is probably gonna sound weird, but these books almost feel like therapy for me by now. It's kind of a form of meditating because they are just so soothing. I don't think I've ever read a book that was so elaborate. There are whole chapters about nothing, and I'm really enjoying it. You're just tagging along with Brianna and Roger and Jamie and Clare. And that's also the downside. So it's a really slow start. I think nothing really happens until chapter 52. If you've read the book, that scene with Roger when they find him, I was holding my breath. And I've noticed that pretty much everyone in the Fiery Cross is horny all the time. There's a lot of talk about breasts and penises. Yeah, there's just a lot of sex in general. But then again, there was no electricity, so you had to entertain yourself somehow. Okay, I just read that Leanda Gabaldon plans to write 10 books in the Outlander series, so I'll definitely not finish them in 2020. I enjoyed the book, but not as much as the previous one. I gave it 4 stars. And the final book I wanted to talk to you guys about is Star Daughter by... Yeah, I just thought I'd show it to you guys because I have no idea how to pronounce this name. This is a magical story about starlight, constellations, and songs inspired by Hindu mythology. We follow Sheetal Mystery, who is a young woman about to turn 17, and her mother is a star and her father is a mortal. The pull from the sky is growing stronger, and one day Sheetal loses control. Her starfire burns her father, who ends up in the hospital, and only a full star's blood can heal him. And that's kind of where the story takes off. So she goes into the sky to this palace filled with starlight rooms, and she meets her family, the stars. I just love all the magical elements in this story. For instance, there's the night market where you can go to buy all kinds of magical goodies like rainbow roses and amethyst velvet saris and couches made of turtles. There's also a magical library and the Hall of Mirrors where the stars can look at the mortals. And the writing style is equally as magical. My favorite quote, and also a great example of the magical writing style: "There will always be those who speak in darts and spears. You must not allow yourself to be pierced by their ill will." There's a female-female romance, which I really appreciated because I know that in Indian culture that's still a taboo, but there were also some things that I didn't like. So the ending, I think it was like the last 100 pages or so, felt really rushed. A lot of things happened and not all of it made sense. There's this character called Brigid who does a really drastic thing and it just felt a little bit out of context. The galactic competition is a nice touch, but I kept wondering why it was held in the first place and why it was so important. It just didn't really add up, and also I couldn't get over the complicated names. I know that that's part of the reading experience and the Indian culture. She could have toned it down a little bit. Names like Radhika Poi and Danishta Nakshatra, it kind of pulls you out of the story. This is the first YA fantasy that I've read that is inspired by Hindu mythology. I think it's a very unique story with some great elements, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And that was it, my September wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, then please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, and let's stay in touch.